up, we gotta go. Wake up, we gotta go. Oh.
This is Mastering Real Estate with Master Sergeant Brian Wignall from the Wignall Group and the F.C. Tucker Company. On this show, we walk you through the process of home buying, maintenance, investing in real estate, and selling your home. Each week, we'll be joined by one of our platoon of local real estate experts to inform us about the various facets of the real estate industry.
I'll watch you with my back. Whoa, 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 whoa. Wake up, we gotta go. Wake up, we gotta go.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today. This is Mastering Real Estate with your hosts, myself, Master Sergeant Brian Wignall, with the Wignall Group Real Estate and the F.C. Tucker Company. And I'm joined here by my co-host, Matt Lottis, the owner of Pillar to Post Home Inspections.
Well, Brian, good to see you again. It's hard to believe it's been a week since we recorded that very first show. Before we dive into today's topic and answer some listener questions, let's do a real quick recap or encapsulation of last week's show, where we kind of talked about, in general, why people want to buy a house and why it's usually a good idea, almost regardless of what the state of the economy is. So let's go through that real quick.
Absolutely, Matt. A couple of the reasons why I think buying a house is really important, regardless of what's going on with the housing market, is, first of all, house payments are relatively stable. Rent, on the other hand, generally goes up every year. So when you purchase a home, you've got a relatively stable amount of monthly payment that you're going to pay for the next 30 years. When you're renting, landlords want to make money, and so as property values appreciate, your rent payment is going to appreciate also. So having that stability in your monthly payment. Number two, a home is an investment vehicle. It's one of the few investments you make that will always have an intrinsic value. Even in a slow real estate market, you can always rent out a house and make income. Third reason, unlike cars, clothing, stocks, bonds, and other things we purchase, a home is almost always an appreciating asset.
Yeah, even in the real estate market we've experienced over the last 2 to 3 years, where housing values seem to have just shot up and there seemed to be no ceiling or limit on that value, things are stabilizing a little bit right now. And in all honesty, I think we can probably expect those values to maybe even dip a little bit over the next year or two. But if you can stay in that house for a year or two, I think we'll resume kind of that slow, steady upward climb in home values, which is more than you can say for Bitcoin or Dogecoin or anything like that these days. So
absolutely.
I think that house really is, despite kind of the current unsettledness in the market, a really good investment. We also talked a little bit about why you should use an agent, and what really jumped out at me there was the fact that basically the cost of the agent is priced into the house.
Absolutely.
So regardless of whether you use a buyer's agent or not, that money is already allocated and going somewhere. So it's probably always a good idea to use an agent when you are purchasing that house.
Absolutely. As a buyer, you have something called an agency relationship with a buyer's agent. So you are not a customer, you are a client. With a customer, you could have the nicest salesman in the world, but they are going to be looking out for the best interest of the business that they're working for or themselves. Whereas with a client relationship, if I'm working with you as a buyer's agent, I am legally obligated to look out for your best interest in a transaction. And in fact, just like an attorney, you hear about attorney-client privilege. And just like an attorney, licensed qualified real estate agents, we even have something called errors and omissions insurance. So if we make a mistake, which hopefully won't ever happen, but if we make a mistake, we're even covered against that. So that's important to have someone that's on your side, especially if it's not costing you anything as a buyer.
This is your area of expertise, so I'm honestly going to toss the ball right back to you, but what should we be looking for in a good agent when we're trying to choose somebody to represent us, whether it's on the buyer side or whether it's on the seller side of the transaction?
Well, a couple of things that I think are important. First of all, I think using a full-time realtor is important. When you're looking at the largest transaction that you will possibly be involved with, someone's home is generally their largest purchase or the largest sale that they have. You want to have someone that's doing this full-time, not doing it in between another job. You want to deal with somebody that's collaborative and not adversarial. I've been in transactions with some agents that are just adversarial. They just want to win. And for them to be able to win, somebody's got to lose. And it becomes a very unenjoyable transaction. And I've even had agents that their own desire to win has gotten in the way of the best interest of their buyers or sellers in the transaction. I think availability is key. You want an agent that's going to answer the phone when you call or get back with you right away. Another thing to look for in a real estate agent is somebody that's a successful agent. If they've received awards or gotten recognition with the brokerage that they're working at, if they've sold a lot of properties, one question I think is real valid is ask the agent, how many properties did you sell last year? Yeah. Because the more experienced, the more that they've sold, the better that they get at this job, and probably the better they're going to get in negotiation, which is something else we're going to talk about.
Yeah, the number that agents seem to like to tout is the total value of what they've sold in the last year. And that is important, but I think it's also important to know how many houses they've sold in the last year and kind of what their demographic is. What's the average price of those houses to get a clear picture of how much business they've done recently.
Absolutely. If someone sold $1.5 million last year, but that $1.5 million was one house that was owned by their dad, well, that's a little bit different than the person that sold $1.5 million and sold 20 houses that were lower priced houses. And lastly, I think having personalities that mesh with you as a buyer is really important. You want to have someone that you can relate to, that you're comfortable with, that you can trust, and that's the last thing, somebody that's trustworthy, that's really looking out for your best interest.
Yeah, there's two things here that from kind of an outsider's point of view, I would probably reiterate. And I have heard this one from, multiple agents that we've dealt with in the inspection business over the years, that one of the ways to tell if the guy you're considering hiring, your agent to represent your interest, is a good negotiator, is to basically ask them to justify their commission and what they're going to do to help you sell that house or help you buy that house. And if they can't give you a good, sound argument why they're worth every penny that they're going to get in that commission check, that may or may not be the agent for you. If they can't even justify their own salary, how are they going to justify their negotiations with the opposite party when you're going to try to buy that house?
Absolutely. Agree with you 100%. People a lot of times will say, well, why shouldn't I use the cut rate agent or the guy that's, charging very little? And I come back to that old phrase, you get what you pay for. If I'm not a good enough negotiator to negotiate my own paycheck, why would you want to hire me to negotiate the most expensive purchase that you're probably going to make this year? So a good agent is worth their weight in gold. Now, conversely, I've had people say, realtors don't do anything. They'll take some pictures and put it on the multiple listings and, make a big paycheck. If that's all an agent is doing, I would agree with you. He's not worth what you're paying, but a good agent's going to do a lot more than that to market your house. And some of us are pretty competitive. I absolutely, and this maybe comes from my 30-year Army background, but I'm extremely competitive. If I can sell a house and it's the top selling house in that subdivision, I just think that is just the coolest thing in the world. So I take it very competitively. I'm a real competitive person, and we've got a whole marketing department behind us, and I make sure that I do everything that I can to make sure as a seller that you sell your house at the highest price, or make sure as a buyer that I help you negotiate the very best price that we possibly can on your new real estate, because I don't want it to be a transactional relationship. I want it to be a personal relationship. I want you to come back, Matt, if you're buying or selling a house from me, I want you to be able to come back and contact me if you need anything else done in the future. If you know a family member or a coworker that wants to buy, I want you to have that kind of an experience to where you come back to me. That's how I stay in business.
Yeah, we teach an awful lot of CE classes in my business, and one of the things that we always try to get across the brokers that are in those classes is they have to do everything they can to show their value, because that is what's going to garner them that referral tree that you're talking about. Yep. And all those subsequent clients. If all that broker is doing is putting your house on the MLS and slapping a price on it and taking some pictures, they are not showing their value whatsoever. So from a broker standpoint, whatever you can think of to demonstrate that value you bring to the transaction, I think is absolutely critical to the success of your business. And then the other thing on this list that actually jumped out at me was the full-time realtor portion of it. And this is not to say that there are not some part-time agents out there that are really good, But as a general rule, I think you probably ought to be looking for somebody who is a full-time realtor. It always reminds me of the commercial, and I don't even remember what the company was anymore, that a contractor would pull up and he'd have a whole handful of business cards, and it was today we do siding and tomorrow we do sidewalks and pouring concrete. And I have seen agents in this business who have their real estate license, who have their mortgage broker license, who are also appraisers. So the key, or one of the keys in hiring the right agent or finding the right agent, I think, is honestly looking for somebody who runs this as a full-time professional business.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you 100%. And that's why everybody, myself and everybody on my team are full-time agents. This is our full-time gig. Our livelihood is dependent on doing a good job for our clients.
Well, guys, that's our recap from last week. So we are going to take a short break here. And when we come back, we are going to answer a couple of questions, starting with Mary Ann from Carmel, who has a question about cash buyers for houses.
If you have any questions about real estate or anything regarding the real estate industry, please text them to 317-797-3580, and we'll feature those on a future show. You're listening to Mastering Real Estate with Master Sergeant Brian Wignall and Matt Lottis. And welcome back to Mastering Real Estate with your hosts, Master Sergeant Brian Wignall with the Wignall Group Real Estate and the FC Tucker Company, and my co-host Matt Lottis, the owner of Pillar to Post Home Inspections.
Well, Brian, we actually got some questions last week after you so bravely put your phone number out there for people to text you. And let's go ahead and talk about a couple of those. And we're going to start with Mary Ann from Carmel, who says, what do you think about cash buyers that send letters to your house? Is that a good deal? And I think we've probably all gotten these, especially given the market that we've been in over the last couple of years. I know I get letters in my mailbox. I get text messages from guys wanting to buy my house for cash. I get unsolicited emails for people wanting to buy my house. So to me, that just feels a little bit scammy. So are those offers legitimate? Are they a good deal, or are they not such a great deal?
Well, I will let you know that, but it's kind of interesting. I'm holding my phone up to Matt right now. I just got a text here, and it said, I'd like to know if you have received our text last week in regard to your home. We were actually on a daily drive, so it's only good to ask if you are open to discuss a fair price deal for it. I don't think they're interested because I wanted $1.75 million and a new Corvette for my house that's roughly worth about $450. So I don't think they're going to be interested.
It's funny, whenever those people text me, I text them back saying, well, I'm not interested in selling my house, but I do own a home inspection business if you guys need somebody to partner with you to inspect all those houses you're buying. And strangely, I never hear back from them.
Well, I'll tell you, dealing with these wholesalers, they've had to become a lot more aggressive as the market got really hot, because there weren't a lot of fixer-uppers that were being listed that weren't selling extremely quickly. And I have a quick story of one of those scenarios here about a year ago. I was contacted by a gentleman that I went to church with. His mother had just been offered a specific sum on her house to sell her house by one of the cash sellers, one of the wholesalers. And she was getting ready to sign the contract. And he called me up and he said, hey, Brian, could you go out and meet with my mom and see if this is a good deal or not? So I went out to her house, introduced myself. Her name was Susan. And as we're walking around, I asked her the first question. It's like, Susan, why are you selling your house? And she told me the reason she was selling her property is she wanted to fund her retirement pension. She was going to be moving in with a relative, and she wanted to buy a older Honda CR-V. She needed a little bit more dependable car, and she had a budget. She was setting out about $7,000-8,000, and she wanted to buy this little Honda CR-V, and the money these people had offered for her house would enable her to fund her retirement and buy this Honda CR-V. So I started looking at the house for her. I had done a comparable market analysis before I went there, and the price they'd offered, there had not been a single house in that subdivision over the last 12 months that had sold that low. So I'm thinking I'm going to come here and check this house out that is just in really rough shape. And surprisingly, as I'm walking around, the house hadn't been updated a lot, but it was in just pristine condition. And so I'm walking around, and as I'm checking it out, I asked her about the roof. It's like, Susan, your roof looks like it's in great shape. How old is your roof? And she said, oh, it's just 2 years old. I was like, okay, great. well, what about the windows? The windows look pretty new too. You know, it had nicer vinyl windows. And she said, oh, those are about 2 years old also. And I asked her about that, and I found out that she'd had some major storm damage a couple years prior. She had replaced the roof. She had some damaged windows, so she went ahead and replaced all the windows in her house. She replaced about half the gutters in her house, and she also put new siding on the house. So here we're dealing with a house that has new roof, new siding, you know, gutters, windows. Then I asked her about her HVAC system, and she told me that she had just got a new HVAC, or, you know, air conditioning furnace within the last 5 years. So I'm kind of waiting to see what's wrong with this place. And as we're walking in the basement, she told me that the wholesaler that had sent her the letter, he told her that her suspended ceiling in the basement, in the finished basement, needed to be replaced with drywall, and gave her all these reasons why she would have a really hard time selling this house and why his deal was such a great deal. And I told her, listen, give me a week. Let's list this thing. I think we can at least get $75,000 more than what you were offered. So we put it on the market. She was very skeptical she was going to get that much money for it. Put it on the market. And within a week, we had multiple offers on this property. We did nothing. We didn't replace the ceiling in the basement. We had multiple offers. And I went back to her, and it was a pretty fun conversation. I said, hey, Susan, you know how you were talking about that Honda CR-V? She said, yeah. I said, what do you think of the brand new Lexus SUVs? Or better yet, have you seen the new Cadillac ESV? And she was kind of not tracking what I was saying. And she said, well, those are way past what my budget is. And I said, well, yeah, they're pretty expensive. I think the new Escalade's almost $90,000. Guess what? We just got an offer in on your house that would let you fully fund your retirement pension, buy a $90,000 ESV if you wanted to, and take your whole family to Disney World. And she was ecstatic. And we were able to list and sell that house within a week. So in most cases, Matt, to answer your question, dealing with wholesalers, the people that are sending you letters, it's not a good deal for you. Most of those guys, the metric that they'll use is they offer you 40% less than market price after they do repairs.
Yeah, and realistically what that means is if you picture a $200,000 house, they're going to offer you $120,000 before any kind of repair costs, and then in all likelihood, they're probably going to go through that house with you and, well, like you just said, oh, we're going to have to put a ceiling in here, we're going to have to put a flooring in here, your HVAC system looks a little bit old, we probably got to replace that. And by the time it's all said and done, you're probably at about 50% market value on a lot of these properties. So it's usually not a great deal for people. It, maybe could be if there's a situation you just absolutely have to get out of right now. And this isn't to say that there's also not good cash buyers out there. We partner with a company that does an awful lot of investment work, but they're generally buying houses that are in really, really rough shape. Neglected rental properties, houses where folks have lived in them for 40, 50, 60 years, not done any maintenance. And in that case, they're offering, I think, a reasonable price for a property they're going to have to put some investment into, flip it, turn it around, and get it back on the market again. But the folks that are out there just sending you emails or texts, I would be very, very wary of those, because you've just got to understand how the business model works and where they're going to make their profit. So then all of this begs the question, are there cases where it might be a good idea to consider one of those all-cash offers? Absolutely.
I would say, my professional opinion, 99.99% of the time, no. But there are those few situations. Like you said, you have a house that is just a complete wreck that needs tons of updates, and you have a situation where the seller can't wait. They're behind on house payments, the bank's getting ready to foreclose, something like that. That situation, yeah, it might make sense. But in most situations, even if your house is rough, talk to a real estate agent. I've got a good recommendation for you, but talk to a real estate agent. Find out what the house is worth on the open market, and a lot of times it makes sense just to list it. And we've even got people that buy houses for the purpose of fixing them up and flipping them. So do that. You'll make more money. and you're gonna be able to take advantage of the appreciation of your property.
And that's actually an excellent point. So we're talking kind of the difference between wholesalers and people that might be buying that house to flip it when we're talking about some of these companies. So a lot of these cash buyers are just wholesalers who are hoping to get that house at such a discounted rate that they really don't have to do anything to it. And then they're going to turn it around and sell it to maybe another investor who's looking to flip it. Whereas the company I was just talking about that we do an awful lot of inspections for, their business is they do a little bit of wholesaling, but they are primarily getting those properties to actually buy them, fix them up in a more traditional flipping sense, and then sell them to individual buyers. So a lot just depends on the business model of the folks, whoever those cash buyers are, that are looking to purchase that house. Do we want to talk real briefly about some of the online buyers out there, the so-called iBuyers?
Sure.
And how those work?
Absolutely. There are a lot of, I'm using the term iBuyer generically,
yeah,
but there are a lot of companies out there that will offer to buy your house sight unseen at a specific price. Once again, what happens in a lot of cases is they will offer a specific price, but then during the transaction, they'll do an inspection. They'll tell you that they're going to have to decrease what the offer was, predicated on what they find. And by the time that you're done, you could have gone out and you could have, listed it on the open market and made quite a bit more. So if you're in a desperate situation where you need to sell your house immediately, the company that I work for, FC Tucker, they have something called a quick buy program. But I would still say in most cases, it just makes more sense to take that house, list it on the market, have it marketed well, and sell it and give someone the opportunity to buy that wants to fix up that house and do that on their end.
Yeah, we live in a very much online world, and obviously it's been even more so with the pandemic over the last 2 years. But if you look at the numbers behind all those companies that will make you an online offer for your house, if you were to list that and sell it more traditionally, you'll actually get on average about 13% more for that property than what that iBuyer, quote unquote, is going to offer you. And that only makes sense because their business model is to buy that house at a little bit of a discount, maybe do a little bit of renovation work on it, some paint and carpet, and then just put it right back onto the market again and make a 10 or 11 or 12% profit on it. So again, it may not be a bad option for some people, but I would not consider it as my first option for a house.
Absolutely. Just like with any kind of medical diagnosis, get a second opinion.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are almost at the end of this segment, so we're going to take a short break, and after this, I think we're going to come back and switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about interest rates, because that is a hot topic in the real estate world these days, and then we are going to go back to a few more listener questions after that. So we'll see you in a minute.
If you have any questions about real estate or anything regarding the real estate industry, please text them to 317-797-3580, and we'll feature those on a future show. You're listening to Mastering Real Estate with Master Sergeant Brian Wignall and Matt Lottis. And welcome back to Mastering Real Estate with your hosts, Master Sergeant Brian Wignall with the Wignall Group Real Estate and the FC Tucker Company, and my co-host Matt Lottis, the owner of Pillar to Post Home Inspection.
So let's jump right in and answer a couple of listener questions here that we got after our show last week. And we'll start with Sarah from Noblesville, who wants to know, are we in a bubble? The answer was we were in a bubble. I think we're coming out of that bubble, but we'll talk about it a little bit more here. And how high do you think we're going to see interest rates get before they level off or start dropping again? As high as the 1980s, or something a little bit more reasonable than those double-digit interest rates we saw way back then?
Well, what I would say is, if by bubble you mean are we in a situation or going into a situation where a house is worth $1 million today and tomorrow it's worth $600,000. I mean, you saw a lot of that stuff in areas like Las Vegas and areas of California. And I would say if that's the definition, then absolutely not. In Indiana, even during the mortgage crisis in 2008 to 2012, we didn't see prices like tank. Appreciation flatlined. We didn't see prices tank. But are we going to see appreciation slow down? Absolutely. I think we're already seeing that a little bit. And so, yeah, I definitely think that. Now, what do I think as far as interest rates appreciating? I don't really know. A couple interesting statistics here that I kind of looked up. In the last 10 years, interest rates, the lowest that they've been was let me see here, December 2020, 2.68% was the lowest mortgage rate in history of the United States. Highest interest rates that we've had would be 16.63% was the average rate in 1981. Now, you had people that were paying higher than that. If your credit wasn't good, you weren't getting that sweet 16.63% interest rate. But that was the normal interest rate back then. Now, what's going on right now? We're not anywhere near that. What's going on right now? The high right now, as of a couple days ago, was 7.675%. Now, that's the highest that they've been in the last decade. So we've actually had the lowest price in the last decade, in 2020, and the highest price just like a couple days ago. But 7.67 is still a historically decent rate compared to what it has been in the past. And I could see it going up a little bit more. I personally don't see it going back up to 16.63%. But what do you think, Matt? What's your opinion?
So a couple of things come to mind here. I was talking to an agent yesterday, and we were discussing interest rates a little bit, and he's been in the business probably about a decade at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And as we were discussing interest rates, I had mentioned that some mortgage folks that I trust say an actual, what we'll call normal interest rate should probably be between, about 6 and 8%. Historically speaking, that's been a good, steady, stable interest rate that serves the interest of all parties involved in the transaction. His point was, in a decade worth of being in real estate, he had never been in a time where he had seen 6 to 8% interest rates. So we have been, in a lot of ways, in kind of an artificially induced period of very low interest rates that can't continue forever for all kinds of monetary reasons that we probably don't want to get into on this show. But realistically speaking, where we are now, somewhere between about 6 and 8%, is actually not a bad interest rate at all. It's just a little bit of a shock to the system for people that have gotten used to home buying interest rates of somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4%. So I think when this is all said and done, this is where we are now is probably about where we're going to stabilize. I think we'll talk a little bit about a history of interest rates here in a second, because it's honestly a fascinating topic. But Brian, what's your viewpoint from a realtor's perspective?
Well, I'm seeing the market start to cool. At the office I work at the Carmel office, we're talking about that quite often. The higher interest rates is slowing the market down, and it has a pretty heavy impact on how much of a house you can get for dollars spent. For instance, if you were taking out a loan for $350,000 when the rates were down at 2.68% in December 2020, just a couple years ago, your monthly payment would be $1,382 a month. That same exact loan today, $350,000, with a current interest rate of 7.675, that loan payment would be $2,489 a month. So, wow.
A difference
almost double.
The percentage number, when you look at it, is about 187% for the same house over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And just to give you a rough idea, if your budget for a house is $1,382 a month, instead of being able to afford a $350,000 house like you would have been able to 2 years ago, the house you'd be able to afford today is $195,000. And as those rates keep going up, the amount of house that you can buy, the amount of product you can buy for your money continues to kind of diminish.
Yeah, I am sure there's a rule of thumb somewhere that I don't know off the top of my head, but we'll have to look into that a little bit and talk about it on the next show. The stat that really stuck out to me was that in the last 2 years, we've seen both the lowest interest rates and the highest interest rates in more than 10 years.
Absolutely.
So big swings from peak to valley in that, interest rate range. And honestly, when I teach, one of the things I love about teaching is actually giving people some of the history of stuff. And the history of interest rates, the last time we were in an inflationary period like this was the end of the 1970s. And the reason interest rates skyrocketed to those double-digit numbers of somewhere around 16 to 18% was because in order to get out of that inflationary period, Reagan's Fed chairman, Paul Volcker, essentially induced a recession to bring interest rates down, a deliberate cooling of the economy to stop that inflation and get us back on a more even keel again, a more normal footing. One of the results of that, unfortunately, was homeowner interest rates, in the neighborhood of 16 to 18%. I don't think we're going to see that this time around, although you could make the argument that inflation is just as bad now as it was then and we need to do something like that. But I don't think we're going to see quite that increased in interest rates for buying houses, although I do think they'll continue to rise a little bit more from where they are right now.
Great. Well, we got our next question. I agree with you 100%. Next question from Dave Randall in Carmel. What is the best way for neighborhoods to protect against institutional investor companies from coming in and buying up homes for rentals? That's a pretty beefy question there, Dave.
Well, unfortunately, I actually have some experience in this particular area of expertise because I served as the president of my homeowners association for the better part of a decade, which is quite honestly one of the most thankless jobs you can ever have because nobody likes you when you're the president of the HOA. But the answer to the question is, if you are in a neighborhood with an HOA, you absolutely can implement rules that cap the ownership of rental properties in your neighborhood. So that is something we actually did, it's probably been 6 or 7 years ago now when institutional investors really started to come into this market very strongly. We actually capped our rental rate at no more than 15% of the houses in my particular development. It's not an easy process to do because it often requires 75% of your homeowners in that association to sign off on that, to change the covenants and rules and restrictions. But it is very much worth it when you realize that all those investors coming in and putting all these rental properties in your neighborhood actually tend to decrease your property values, sometimes quite considerably. So if you're in a neighborhood where you have an HOA, I would strongly recommend considering putting some kind of cap on the number of rental properties you allow in that neighborhood. And 15%, according to our management company, is kind of traditionally where that number's at. Brian, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what too many rental properties in a neighborhood can do to your property values?
Well, I will say when you have, in some cases, when you have larger landlords buying up big swaths of properties, sometimes you have a situation if it's not a local landlord where maintenance gets kind of deferred, grass isn't kept up, things aren't being taken care of. And there's a real estate term that I learned when I went through the broker's course years ago called external obsolescence. And what external obsolescence means is you can have the nicest house in your neighborhood, but if the house right next to you has got vines growing up the side of it or moss on the roof or broken out windows and it's boarded up, your property is going to be limited to how much it can be worth, predicated on what surrounds it. Kind of like the old axiom with business, what's the most important thing to a business? Location, location, location. Real estate, it's really similar. So if you have a lot of homes in your subdivision, a lot of homes in your neighborhood that are not being maintained, that's where it really hits, because that will start negatively, adversely impacting the value of your house.
So you just touched on something that, and sorry, this is going to be a total non sequitur, but that's the way my brain works, that we hear all the time as a little bit of folk wisdom or common wisdom, that you never want to be the most expensive house in the neighborhood or the least expensive house in the neighborhood. Is there any truth to that? Or does it really just matter on kind of how the area around you is developing and appreciating or depreciating?
No, I absolutely think there's a lot of truth to that. Where that comes into play, that might not impact what offers you get when you're selling your house, but what it will impact is the appraisal that the bank requires to justify the amount of money that you're paying for a property or that a potential buyer is paying for your property. So if you have over-improved your house, if you put granite counters and top-of-the-line windows on this property, and everything in your neighborhood is substantially less than yours, good likelihood, even if you get a high offer, that there's going to be additional negotiation between the listing agent and the buyer's agent when that house appraises at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 less than what the offer was.
And someday we'll have to do a show on appraisals, because that is a topic worthy of its own show or shows. Because we could talk about things like comps and where do you find them, and what happens when you have, say, an offer on a house and the comps don't justify it, and you have to bring money to the closing table. So those are all things to think about when you're pricing that house, or even when you're building that house, and whether you want to be the fanciest house in the neighborhood. So we'll put a pin in that, and we'll come back and talk about that, maybe with even an appraiser guest at some point in time. Hard to believe, but it's already time for our next break. So we'll go ahead and do that. And when we come back, we have got a couple more listener questions to talk about and take us through our final segment.
If you have any questions about real estate or anything regarding the real estate industry, please text them to 317-797-3580, and we'll feature those on a future show. You're listening to Mastering Real Estate with Master Sergeant Brian Wignall and Matt Lottis. And welcome back to Mastering Real Estate with your host, Master Sergeant Brian Wignall with the Wignall Group Real Estate and the FC Tucker Company, and my co-host, Matt Lottis from Pillar to Post Home Inspections.
So, Brian, we have got a couple more listener questions that kind of touch on my area of expertise here. So let's start with Ira from Indianapolis, who wants to know, I've heard of realtors recommending waiving inspections in order to get an offer accepted on a house. Is this something you would recommend? So let's take a look at that from Brian's perspective first, and then I'll give you kind of the inspector's perspective on that afterwards.
I would answer very quickly, absolutely not. I personally have never done that, and I would not recommend waiving any kind of an inspection on a house unless the house has just recently been inspected. Some houses are listed with pre-listing inspections. Other than that, no, because I could walk through this house and it could look great, and there could be something that I wouldn't notice as a potential home buyer, foundation damage or something like that. And I don't think it's in the best interest of a buyer client to ever recommend that. There are ways to get an offer accepted without, getting rid of that contingency.
So is there a lot of that still going on in today's market? I know at the absolute peak of our market in the course of the last year or so, that definitely became a negotiating tactic, but that market has cooled. It is no longer the seller's market that it once was. So is it even a valid concern anymore, at least here in central Indiana and the Midwest? I know other parts of the world may be a little bit different.
Well, believe it or not, people are still doing that. I just sold 2 houses over the weekend, and one of those 2 houses that I sold, the people waived the ability to do an inspection. And this was on a really clean house, but man, I wouldn't do that as a buyer's agent. I just don't think it's in the best interest of your client.
So there were 3 things that I kind of jotted down here real quick while Brian was talking about waiving inspections to get an offer accepted. And obviously, as an inspector, I would never recommend that you do that. You may want to consider other strategies. What we've seen a lot of people do is ask for an inspection, but agree not to ask for any items to be repaired that were under a certain dollar threshold, $1,000 or $5,000, depending on what the circumstances were. The other reason I would never buy a house without getting it inspected is because, unfortunately, too few people today know what they're getting into when they buy a house. So if for no other reason than to know what you're going to have to fix when that house becomes yours, I would strongly, strongly recommend getting that inspection. It will help you at least quantify what you're going to have to do with that house, or what problems and challenges you may be facing with that house once it's yours and once you're moved in there. So even if it's truly a legitimate as-is situation, you should still get that inspection so you don't get in over your head.
Absolutely.
Which then makes me ask the question, can you define for us real quick, and we can talk about it more in a later show, what an as-is or as-is purchase actually is? Is it truly as-is, there's no way to get out of that deal? Or are there outs or instances where you can still back away from that offer if you find out that house is in much worse shape than you thought it was?
Absolutely. Buying a house as is, sometimes people will see a house listed as is. Generally, it's a situation where the homeowner either doesn't have the money to do repairs or just wants to be done with the house. Normally, you submit, if I'm working with you as a buyer, you submit what's called an as-is addendum. Now, what the as-is addendum does is that's protection for the buyer. it says that we're agreeing up in front that we're not going to ask for any repairs, but we still do reserve the right to pull out of the contract if we find something that's a major defect. I would always recommend doing that because you don't ever want to be in a situation where you don't know what you're getting until after you've committed.
And that mirrors what we've seen from the inspection side of the business, that as is isn't necessarily as is. If we find something really truly significant during the inspection process, there's usually a legal, amicable way out for everybody involved in that process. The other couple of notes I jotted down while we were talking about this was we see a definite trend in my business where if a deal falls through on a house, the sellers will subsequently offer that inspection report to subsequent buyers of that house. And then those folks will feel that they don't need to get an inspection because they're covered by that inspection report. That is absolutely not the case. That original inspection report belongs to the people that ordered that inspection and only provides some kind of, I don't even want to say safety or guarantee because that's not what it is, but it's specifically for them and it does not carry any kind of coverage for people subsequently using that inspection report. So, as an inspector, we strongly recommend to brokers that they do not pass that inspection report along to subsequent buyers, but we see that happen all the time in this business. The other thing that I jotted down was a pre-list inspection report, which is an entirely different animal, and that's where usually a seller hires us to come in to do a very detailed, very almost kind of nitpicky inspection on that house so that they know what's wrong with it that they may have to fix or that might present a stumbling block later on. I think those are a great idea, although people tend to shy away from them because, quite honestly, they don't want to know what's wrong with their house because they're a little bit afraid of it. So that's my inspector perspective on it. Brian, what's kind of your broker's perspective on both that pre-listing inspection and on giving inspection reports to other people?
Well, I agree with you because an inspection report is only worth as much as the inspector doing the report, right? Not all inspection companies are made the same. With pre-listing inspections, I do that on every listing I have. And actually, you're aware of that because I call you up every time and have you do that. I think that is just a great idea for a seller because if there are some hidden defects with a house that I'm listing, I want to make sure that we find out about that well in advance so we can mitigate any issue before that house hits the market. I don't want to be blindsided to the fact that there's mold in a crawl space or there's some other issue, there's some leak you're unaware of, and then have a potential buyer want $5,000 in lieu of repairs at closing when that's something that we could get fixed for a couple $100. So I always do that.
And I'm sure we'll talk about this more in later shows because to me, the biggest value in having a pre-listing inspection is it allows your sellers, it makes it much easier for them to defend themselves against the unprofessional inspector who comes in later on that house. But we'll save that for a future date. We've got a question from Kevin H. Why should I get an inspection on a new house or a house that's only a few years old? And I'll give you guys the short and sweet answer to that. And the short and sweet answer to that is because a house is built out of imperfect materials by imperfect people. The corollary to that is there is no such thing as a perfect house, even if it is brand new. We got an email in my office this morning, customer building a brand new house. The floor slab on that house is cracked and out of level 5/8 of an inch in about a 4-foot span. I know it's hard to visualize those numbers over the radio, but that is a very badly cracked and settled slab on a house that doesn't even have siding yet. And unfortunately, in today's world, that kind of thing is super common. Materials are in short supply, subcontractors are in super short supply, and skilled trade subcontractors are almost impossible to find. So it's more true than ever now that brand new house is being built out of imperfect materials by very, very imperfect contractors, if you will. The other problem that we're seeing out there in the world is that the superintendents building these houses, so if you're building a production house, you have what's called a construction superintendent or a construction supervisor, something like that. And they're kind of the foreman responsible for getting that house built and keeping track of everything. Builders have been absolutely overwhelmed in the last couple of years. And I am now talking to construction superintendents who are carrying 25, 27, 30 houses at any point in time. I was talking to a guy 2 days ago who was responsible for building 27 houses split between Plainfield and McCordsville. He is not looking at those houses every day. He just can't. It's no fault of his own. The market has just been that hot. So having another set of eyes, having an inspector come in and look at that house at various stages is even more important now than it ever has been before. And a good builder will welcome a good inspector to come in because it actually helps them do their job. I could go on talking about why you should have an inspection done on a brand new or even a recently built house, but I'm kind of curious as to what Brian's perspective is on this from the other side of the equation.
I agree 100%, Matt. I think that any agent that's really looking out for your best interest is going to recommend spending that couple $100 to get that inspection done, because there are a whole lot of things that can go wrong with a house, even a brand new house. And I've had multiple situations where we'll inspect brand new construction with a what do you call the inspections you do where you do it during the different stages?
It's a phase inspection.
Phase inspection. But I have Matt and his crew come out, do those inspections, and we found multiple things that then I'm able to go as an agent to that builder and say, hey, listen, we're not going to close until you fix these 15 or 20 items we found, because if there are issues that are covered under a builder warranty, we want to get it taken care of before we close.
Awesome, guys. Well, we are almost done for the day, so we really appreciate you being with us this afternoon.
Thanks for joining us again, and if anybody has any questions you'd like to see us answer on a future show, feel free to text me at 317-797-3580.
This is Matt Lottis with Pillar to Post.
And this is Master Sergeant Brian Wignall with the F.C. Tucker Company. And make sure to listen to us next Saturday at 4 p.m.
Whoa, whoa.